Welcome back to today's edition of The Agenda with me, Yvonne Ridley, and studio guests Dr. Kamal Helbawi, Scott Taylor and Ben Harris-Quinney. As we went into the break, I asked who said there is no point in having troops in a mission that cannot be accomplished. The mission might be important, but if it can't be achieved, there is no point in sending these troops into battle. Part of the problem is that counterinsurgency requires a credible local partner. The answer is Peter Galbraith, a former United Nations Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, who was dismissed over what his superiors called Mr. Galbraith's advocacy of Mr. Karzai's removal, an allegation he hotly denied. Despite the denial, the Afghan president was said to be so outraged, according to one parliamentarian, that he threatened to join the Taliban. The comments in April this year came just 2 days after Mr. Karzai said the Taliban could become the legitimate resistance if the international community continued to interfere in Afghanistan's internal politics. Ben, support for the Afghan leader in the West is collapsing, isn't it?
I think part of the problem is, and this was a speech made recently by Rory Stewart, who is a newly elected MP and member of the Foreign Policy Select Committee, is that it's very difficult to centralise government in Afghanistan in such a disparate region. And of course that is what Karzai represents, and I think there is an increasing realisation that he doesn't have control of the nation, and he never will. And therefore I think there has to be a more regional approach to government in Afghanistan. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do, but it's clear that a central approach isn't working.
Is there anyone in Afghanistan, Dr. Helbawi, that the Afghan people would look up to, would listen to, would follow? Any charismatic leader?
Regionally, yes, but not centrally, because of the, the ethnic groups, different languages, different chief tribes, even different education from the north to the south, to the east and the west. And then, so there is no one that can be listened to over the whole country. But there are some personalities that are very well respected, and they can help. For example, newly now is General Muhammad Atanur, because he is controlling at least 6 provinces, Mazar-e Sharif and around. And it never happened since the war that someone can control such a big area.
Scott, you've met a lot of these characters, these personalities. What would you see that as a solution? Having a more widespread group of leaders?
I don't know if it's a solution, but it certainly is the reality. I mean, that's people that they respect, or their tribal leaders, or the warlord that they've always known. And even when they did go through the elections in the early stages, and when even now, what the people do is they vote for the tribal leader or the warlord that they've always known. And they sent him forward because they want regional representation. And nothing really much was delivered in the last 9 years. So that's why people are getting frustrated with it. They're going back and saying, look, then we'll just, democracy is working at the lowest levels.
But some of these leaders have got horrendous human rights records, and we won't name names, but some of the Amnesty International, has a whole log on some of these characters.
Most of the members of Karzai's cabinet, former members of the Northern Alliance, are absolutely feared by the Pashtun majority in the south, because if they consider them to be their enemies, and that's why the Taliban is still growing in support, because the West refuses to convict these guys for the crimes which everybody knows that they've committed, but there's no replacement. The same thing with Hamid Karzai. I mean, there was no electoral mandate that he was given, but he just sort of collapsed back into it. It's the only one that we know, the only one that we've got, and we keep on putting makeup on a cadaver, basically saying that democracy is working, and it isn't, and they know that. And I think that there was, I don't mean to contradict, but the one guy that could pull it together, the one white knight, is this Dr. Ramazan Bashirdost, and he placed 3rd last time, and he runs on the anti-corruption ticket. He's a Hazara, educated in France, speaks French and English, Dari Pashto. The people, no matter which ethnic group they're from, all love the fact that he's anti-corruption, has no armed guards, drives around in this painted car, and he works out of a tent in the Parliament parking lot because they won't give him an office. He got elected as a parliamentarian in the previous one on the anti-corruption ticket. He didn't run in Ghazni where he could have had the ethnic support. He ran in Kabul, and he frightens them. And who turns their back on him? The West. Because the first people he wants, if he's an anti-corruption crusader, is the U.S. Embassy. He wants the embassy in Kabul indicted for the corruption because of their support for Karzai.
But anyone leader who will depend, or the Afghans will know that he has any relation with CIA or Americans or the NATO, will never have general authority in the country.
Why is
will never
support?
Yes.
But why is there this great wave of anti-American sentiment when, you know, a lot of these people happily accepted American dollars for the jihad against Russia? They were great buddies in the 70s.
You may remember, Yvonne, that long time ago, I was saying that it is the Afghan who put the Americans to be the only superpower in the world. Because without the Afghan jihad, America would have been in the Cold War with Soviet Union. So whatever Americans spent in Afghanistan, let us say it came late and it did not satisfy the needs. And it went only to war and insurgency. It did not go to development or education. So the people will never, I'm saying that, the majority of the Afghan people, whether they are with Karzai or with Mullah Omar, they will never respect Americans or the NATO troops until they go out and help in developing the country as they help it in destroying it.
Now, Ben, you advise on foreign policy for the Bow Group, and you also have assisted the Conservatives both in Europe and the UK. What advice, if you were asked for it, would you be giving to the coalition government today in Britain about Afghanistan?
Well, I think that, first of all, to come back to a point you made, Scott, I think it still is important to deal with the Taliban, not to say that they are the same thing as Al-Qaeda, but to say that they create a lawless region in which Al-Qaeda is able to potentially flourish. So I think engagement with the Taliban remains crucial.
The Taliban made a pretty strong rule. They did have law and order, strict as it was. They were able to control with 30,000 troops. That's all they ever had at their zenith. They were able to control most of Afghanistan and with an iron fist.
But it comes back to that problem that it wasn't.
Under their government, the country was secured.
But Afghanistan was still essentially a failed state.
I'll come back to your point in a minute, because this is twice now that we've talked about Afghanistan being a failed state, or the potential. Yes. But before I come back to you on that point, the Agenda crew went off to one of London's most upmarket areas near the Afghan embassy to get the public view.
I'm standing outside the Afghan embassy in London to speak to members of the public about their opinions on the war in Afghanistan. I'll be asking especially how they think NATO should proceed with their campaign and whether it's time to withdraw troops. How would you define a victory in Afghanistan for the US and its allies?
I can't, in all honesty, say there is going to be a real victory out there, because I think eventually when they've gone there'll be a resurgence with the Taliban, and not an awful lot is going to change.
Britain has been there years ago, and when they were very powerful, and they failed, and the Russians failed, and I think the Americans will also fail to win the war. I mean, they will get some progress, but as far as winning, I don't believe they will.
Do you think NATO troops should withdraw and let Afghans find their own solution?
That's almost impossible to answer, because there are so many disadvantages to so many different members of the society, like injustices to women, etc. And how can you turn your back on things like that?
Well, I don't honestly think that's going to happen. They're going to be there for some time longer. How long, I don't know. How long's a piece of string? but eventually they will have to go.
With the benefit of hindsight, was the US and Britain wrong to invade Afghanistan in the first place?
Not in my opinion. No.
As evidenced by circumstances that have sort of that gone on now. It's just impossible to go into a place like that, which has been invaded for goodness knows how many 100 years, time and again, and nobody's ever won it. It's a waste of time and money and lives.
No, I think they felt they had to do something because of 9/11, and that was their answer to it. And Britain backed America up as Tony Blair unfortunately did too much, I think.